This is going to be a lot more Q&A because I want you to ask the questions that are on your mind. I'm going to do kind of a brief overview about the polity, the governance, the shape of the global Methodist Church, and then I'll open it up for questions so that you can ask anything, literally, that you want to ask about the governance and structure of the global Methodist Church, or anything that I covered in the talk, or anything else that's on your heart that you want to talk about. So, the United Methodist Book of Discipline. How many of you all have read the United Methodist Book of Discipline? Parts of it, there you go. Yeah, so I was at, last week I was at WestPath, the General Board of Pensions and Benefits in Chicago. They have a beautiful building in Glenview, and on the wall there they have a framed holder, I guess, that has copies of the Book of Discipline over the years. The Book of Discipline in the late 1700s, in the 1780s, is a very small, pocket-sized book that is maybe about 100 pages in length. The Book of Discipline today is over 1,000 pages in length for the United Methodist Church. The church was far more effective when its Book of Discipline was much smaller. Okay, now I don't know if there's a correlation there or not, but here's the truth. In the 1780s and 90s, the first part of the 19th century, the Methodist movement exploded across the United States. Sometimes settlers would get to communities that they were going to found, and there was already a circuit rider there waiting for them to arrive. I mean, it was almost that way. We were out on the cutting edge, meeting people where they were. We were a movement in those days. But over time, first, we're Methodist, which means that we're methodical people. And we like to have everything very organized, okay, and set down so that we can methodically follow through on who we are. But the other thing that happens in movements over time is they see certain things and they want to encapsulate it and like capture it for all time, and they want to control it. And so that's why provisions in the discipline have been added onto over time, and why it's exploded to more than 1,000 pages, because we try to regulate everything in the life of the church. It almost becomes a straitjacket, okay? Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to that, but one of the goals of the Global Methodist Church has been to simplify the governance of the church. And we have achieved that in that the transitional book of Doctrines and Discipline is 100 pages in length versus over 1,000 pages. Now there's some reason, and we have renamed the document a book of doctrines and discipline. And that's not just a minor change. We're saying that we're going to be a church that has agreement around doctrine, that we will have theological alignment. Now, there's plenty of room for those things which aren't essential for us to talk about and to have differences of opinions. But there's some things that are not open to debate, like who is Jesus, the work of the Holy Spirit, the place of Scripture, the way of salvation. All of those things are non-negotiables for us as a church. So the first part of our Book of Doctrines and Discipline sets forth that doctrine. Now, the other significant thing there is that we recognize that we're part of the Church of Jesus Christ, universal. And so we have tied our doctrine back into the historic confessions of faith that are agreed to by Christians everywhere. The Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, the definition of Chalcedon, and we had set those forth. Then we set forth the articles of religion that come from the Methodist tradition and the confession of faith that come from the Evangelical United Brethren. We believe that one of the things the convening General Conference will likely do is work to bring together those two documents into a single statement of what we believe is the global Methodist Church. And then, of course, our doctrines include the essential sermons of John Wesley, the 52, I think it is, standard sermons, and I guess it's 44 standard sermons, and then the notes on the New Testament. So that's the first part. Then we have provisions that relate to organization of local churches. The most significant operation, the most significant thing there is that we've tried to give local churches maximum discretion on how they organize themselves and operate. In other words, it's a permission-giving environment, not a control environment. Okay. There are essential functions that every local church needs to be attentive to, and those are spelled out, but how a local church does that is up to them. They're the ones who will determine. Then we talk about the ministry of the called. Now, I expect there's going to be a lot of questions in this area, perhaps here. The ministry of the called begins with the order of the laity. First and foremost, every one of us is called to be part of the order of laity. Some of us are then called to be set apart for service, the order of deacons. And then some are called to be set apart for the ministry of word, sacrament, and order, the order of elders. But we envision the way the church exists as a large circle that are the order of the laity. Out of that comes the order of deacon, nested, and then the order of elders, nested. And it's not a hierarchical system, but it's actually, I believe it's an inverted pyramid, because the calling of those who are in the elders order is to serve everyone else in the church, okay? It's not a role of being the chief leader, as it were. But, so we spend time there talking about certified lay ministry, and some of you are asking me about licensed local, lay speakers, certified lay speakers, and that sort of thing. Those kinds of ministries will be continued under the certified lay ministry area, but there'll be other opportunities for laity to work to develop their ministries and their gifts so that they can be recognized in the church for the ministry that they do. Licensed local pastors in the United Methodist Church, you will be received into the new denomination at a minimum to be ordained as deacons. Some of you may have already met the requirements to be ordained as elders, and I can get into the educational requirements and all of that. We have chosen to emphasize what I would call education for ministry while persons are serving in ministry. So we have a system that, for example, if you are called to pastor a local church, that's God's calling on your life, and you're starting the process, you will initially complete 6 courses. They can be through course of study. They can be through an approved educational institution. They all cover sort of basic Christian doctrine, Bible, those sorts of courses. And then you would be ordained as a deacon. You then have to complete 4 additional courses once you're ordained as a deacon within a certain time. So ultimately you take 10 courses. That's far below what is right now. And then you begin your journey towards being ordained as an elder. 5 courses before you're ordained as an elder, 5 courses after you're ordained as an elder. I can certainly get into more detail around that. We have The next part of the discipline deals with bishops, or the superintendency. Now, there are many people who hoped in this process that we might not have bishops anymore, because bishops have been a struggle in the United Methodist Church. And I'll just tell you where I personally came down on this. We're going to have someone who is going to be in oversight of an area. And we can call them a general superintendent, or we can call them a bishop, or we can call them the grand poobah. I mean, we can do whatever name we're going to assign there. The important thing is, what is the responsibilities of that office? How are they selected? And what is their tenure? And so in the Global Methodist Church, there'll be term-limited bishops, so you're not elected for life. The election process is not geographical, so it doesn't become a buddy-buddy system. Responsibilities are defined to be focused on teaching and upholding the doctrine of the church, and mentoring and encouraging local churches to be successful. Bishops will not have significant responsibilities outside of their geographic area, so that they can be deployed to work in the geographic area they're serving, instead of constantly being taken off elsewhere. It's a little bit about, and instead of district superintendents, we call for presiding elders who are also serving local churches. So they're not set apart and pulled out of the local church. I can get into a lot more about that. Another major difference in the Book of Doctrines and Discipline of the Global Methodist Church is the way the church beyond the local church is organized. We desire to have annual conferences that are smaller in size than most annual conferences today, so that people know each other better and can work in relationship and cooperatively in ministry. We will not have the huge infrastructure that is at the general church level, though there won't be general boards and agencies with significant staffs of hundreds of employees. There'll be general commissions that are composed of laity and clergy who are not employees of the general church. They're serving the church in a capacity where they continue to serve in the local church, but they have responsibilities. So the footprint of the institution is much smaller. Two additional things, and then I want to get to your questions. And hey, I've only used 10 minutes to get to this point. That's great. Two additional things. One is, people are often interested in, well, financially, what does this mean for our church? Okay? And so right now, the way the United Methodist Church determines apportionments is basically from the top down. The General Conference meets, and they decide that the quadrennial budget, the 4-year budget, is going to be $604 million. And they then take that pie and they divide it up amongst the annual conferences and say, Virginia, you have to pay this much of that sum. And then the annual conference says, okay, here's the sum we have to pay. Local churches, this is what you have to pay. It's a top-down system. Okay, in the Global Methodist Church, we call it connectional funding, and it's a bottom-up system. It starts with what your operating income is, and you're the ones who determine what that operating income is. You then apply a percentage to that to determine what your churches would give in terms of connectional funding for the general church and for the annual conference. The Transitional Book of Doctrines and Disciplines says that the amount that goes from your local church to general church connectional funding cannot be more than 1.5%. Right now, in the current quadrennium, it's 3%. So it's 1/2, it's 50% of what churches are paying now, 50% less. And your annual conference, its percentage cannot be more than 5%. Most annual conferences are charging around 10% when they do the top-down thing. So it's about 50%. So that's a little bit on connectional funding. I can unpack that more, but usually we're interested in what the financial impact of something is. The other thing that I get a lot of questions on is clergy deployment. What happens when your church is going to have a change in pastors for whatever reason. During the transitional period, what it provides is that, first, we don't think that there will be a whole lot of changes in deployment. The changes that will occur either because there's been a death in a particular church, there's been a retirement, or the person who is currently the pastor has decided they're staying in the United Methodist Church and not coming. But if your church votes to align with the Global Methodist Church and your pastor says they are going to go with the Global Methodist Church and you all are fine with one another, that person's going to be your pastor during the transitional period. There's not going to be a change. If there's a change necessary, we mandate a process of consultation that is defined in the Transitional Book of Doctrines and Discipline. And it's not just you guys fill out a form and we might look at your form. It is real interaction. And yes, right now in the Transitional Book of Doctrines and Discipline, ultimately the bishop appoints the pastor. So that is the same. This was one of the issues that divided the group that met in March of 2020. And so we kept it closer to the current system because we believe this is a decision that ultimately the convening general conference will need to make. So the bishop will make the appointment. The proposal that the WCA has for the convening general conference actually gives local churches a choice. You can either be sourced by the annual conference or you can be resourced. If you're sourced by the annual conference, it's essentially the system that we have now. Ultimately, the bishop will appoint a pastor to your church. And many churches will probably opt that way. But if you're a church that chose to be resourced, the conference would provide you with a list of people who might be interested in coming to your church. You would not be limited to that list. You could go outside that list and invite others to be considered. You wouldn't be limited by the conference you're in. You could go anywhere in the United States or the world for that matter and invite people to talk to your church. Ultimately, your committee, your staff parish committee, would decide on a minimum of 5 people that you might want to talk to. And those 5 people have to be approved by the bishop and the cabinet. But once they're approved, your committee interviews those people and you come up with the person that your church would prefer to be appointed out of those 5 people. And then the bishop appoints that person to your church. The bishop has authority to say, well, I disagree with you on that person, but the odds of them doing that is very slim given that they had to approve the 5 people that went into the pool. So that significantly increases your church's involvement. It's still a sent system. It's not a called system, but it significantly increases your purpose. So finally, the things that what we've tried to do is to reduce the general church overhead and control of what's happening in the local church, to empower laity and local churches to own more of the decisions that they're making, including how they're organized to do ministry and what their ministry focus is, how much they end up paying in connectional funding, and their role in interacting with the selection of their pastor. So there's a whole lot more, but that's where I'm going to stop right now because you probably have specific questions. So just raise your hand and I'll call on you. Yes, sir.
How would the Grand Poobah be elected? Would they have to be clergy?
Okay. And by Grand Poobah, we understand that bishops we're talking about. But I like the fact that you've already adopted my name. I don't think there's much chance it's going to be in the discipline. The way first, there was no provision in the Transitional Book of Doctrines and Discipline on the election of bishops because that will not occur until after the convening general conference. But what the WCA has proposed is that annual conferences will nominate up to 2 people to be considered for election. They'll be elected to a pool of persons that can be considered to be bishops by the general conference. You are elected to a pool, and then say the Virginia Conference, its Committee on Episcopacy, would look at that pool that has been elected and say, we want to talk to this person in the pool about being our bishop for the coming season. So the fact that you're elected to a pool, the pool doesn't mean you will become a bishop. It just means the general church has recognized that you have the gifts and graces. So it puts a whole lot more control in the annual conference to select the person that they believe lines up with the vision, values, and work of the annual conference. Yes, they would have to be clergy. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Would you agree with is the Global Methodist Church intended to be a church that is broad within the bounds of biblical orthodoxy?
Yes. In other words, for example, some churches try to highly regulate worship for their thing. We recognize that there may be many styles of worship within the broad spectrum of the Global Methodist Church. So we won't highly regulate that, although we will have standard services and that sort of thing. But yes, and so how you do ministry, there'll be broad spectrum there. I don't know if there's a specific thing that you're.
When I have a follow-up maybe has there been any discussion about ecumenical relations or intercommunion with AME Zion, and other traditionally Wesleyan groups?
Yes. I can't remember if you go to the Transitional Book of Doctrines and Discipline, you'll find 2 sections that address ecumenical relationships. One is with non-Wesleyan bodies, not from our family, so to speak, and the other one is with Wesleyan bodies. And there's a process by which we would go through recognizing relationships at varying levels, and even including organic union, where we would actually merge. And so, for example, as you know, the United Methodist Church is present here in the United States, in some African countries, in some European countries, in the Philippines. But there are over 180 Methodist bodies worldwide. United Methodism is just one of those. But there are Methodist churches that have not been part of the United Methodist Church that are very interested in becoming part of the Global Methodist Church. And so those bodies might choose to organically unite with us and become part of us. So there's everything from that to them being affiliated with us or associated in some way. Yeah. Yes, let me go back here and then I'll come up to you.
So, quick question about the licensed local pastor.
Right.
I'm in the process of candidacy right now.
Okay.
I am also 2 years into a master's in divinity at a non-approved seminary. Are y'all going to have the same approved seminaries, or are you going to expand that list? And I like what you said about being a deacon and becoming ordained that way, because as it stands right now, I wouldn't be able to achieve ordination without going through a longer process and more education.
Right. The answer on approved educational institutions is no. They won't be the same. Okay. And yet we're in the process of working that out. And by the way, under the system, a person can complete the 20 courses, which is less than is normally in most educational institutions is required for an MDiv. So that what that means is a person can be ordained an elder after having completed 15 of the courses, and then 5 more later. May not have an MDiv, may have gotten all of those 15 courses from a course of study or something like that, but we encourage folks to go on and get an MDiv, because we believe that assist in preparing you for the kind of ministry God is calling you to. But since you're in process now, and this may be relevant to other people in the room, we will give credit for whatever you have completed in that process in the United Methodist Church. You don't have to jump through hoops again, okay? There you go. So the desire is to shorten that process. This is the danger when you ask a question to someone who's a lawyer, okay? I start thinking of other things to say, and I don't stop. But another important thing here is the way we are doing funding for theological education. So in the United Methodist Church, we all contribute to a ministerial education fund, and a significant part of that fund only goes to the 13 United Methodist seminaries, whether they graduate persons who end up becoming United Methodist pastors or not. The other portion of that is used as service loans by local annual conferences. In the Global Methodist Church, all theological education will be funded through those who are consumers of the education. So if you were in that process, it's going to be a service loan. You have to serve, but after you complete your service time, you should be debt-free from theology, and you decide where that money is, what educational institution that money is expended to, which should make seminaries more responsive to the needs of the church and those who are entering ministry. Yeah. You had a question, and then I see you back there.
If a conference decides to remain with the UMC, are all the congregations in the conference bound by that, and how is the decision made?
Sure. So thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. I meant to be doing that. He asked if a conference decides to remain in the United Methodist Church, will all the churches be bound by that, or will that work out? Okay, so under the protocol, you as a U.S. congregation don't have to wait until your conference makes a decision. Okay, you don't have to wait for the Virginia conference to take a vote, number one. So let's say the protocol is adopted in early September of 2022. You can schedule a vote in your congregation within weeks of that vote, and within months be out of the United Methodist Church. And the vote in your annual conference, in your church, your leadership board decides whether it's going to be a 50% vote, simple majority, 50% plus one, or whether it's going to be a 2/3 vote. Okay, so your church decides where you want to, and if that vote is achieved, you would be able to align with the Global Methodist Church. The default, if no vote is taken at any level, you remain post-separation United Methodist, okay? Now, the annual conference, and a vote doesn't have to occur in every local church, but 10% of the members of a local church can say, we want to vote, and it has to happen, okay? A vote doesn't have to occur at the annual conference level, but 20% of the delegates can sign on for a vote, and then it does have to happen. If a vote doesn't happen at the annual conference level, it remains post-separation United Methodist Church. The protocol provides that the vote to align with a new denomination like the Global Methodist Church is 57%. This shows the messiness of a mediation. This was the last provision that we agreed on, and it was a compromise. Everyone else in the room, other than me and Pat Miller, wanted a 2/3 vote. We insisted on a 50% vote. You could see what happened. The mediator said, you guys are not going to reach a deal unless you just split the difference. And so it ended up being 57%. So if your annual conference doesn't take a vote, then all the churches remain post-separation UMC unless they individually take a vote. And they can do that, and they have up to 4 years to do that. Okay, so it's not like it has to happen immediately. But if they want to happen immediately, they can do so. If the annual conference votes to align with the new denomination, then all the churches in the annual conference go into that new denomination, but individual churches could take a vote to say, we want to stay with the post-separation UMC.
That's sometimes what happens in most conferences. Would you say that the whole conference would transplant to the GNC?
There are, my last estimate, there are 13 annual conferences where we believe the vote might achieve the whole annual conference coming in. So I said I'd take this gentleman back here and then.
Two questions real quickly. One, I know you talked about the educational requirements for relation, that kind of thing. If you're already ordained here in the United Methodist Church, is that a somewhat seamless transition?
Yes. The folks who are ordained elder will transfer as elders into, there's a brief vetting process that will occur, but it's not, I mean, the protocol provides that they're to turn your file over, so obviously background check, that kind of stuff would be there, and as long as you're in good standing and you affirm the theological positions, then it should not be a problem.
The other question is about pension liability.
Yes.
We wouldn't be under the trust clause anymore, but wouldn't we still have the
Okay, so now start to glaze over here, everybody. Okay, I'm gonna. So first, if you're a United Methodist pastor, you are vested in your retirement benefits. They cannot be taken away from you. The fact that you go to another denomination or you surrender your credentials or whatever, those retirement benefits cannot be taken away from you. There's a portion of them that may not be fully funded, okay? And that's why if you've tried to disaffiliate or you've thought about disaffiliating, there's a significant sum of money that has to be paid to unfunded pension liability. The reality is there's two ways that they look at pension liability: funded and market. If they look at it at market, usually it means that there's more liability there, and that's what the standard is for disaffiliation. And now I'm not even sure I'm following myself anymore, okay? This is where it gets really confusing. But the reality is that the pension plans the existing pension plans of the United Methodist Church are fully funded on a funded basis. And they're overfunded on a funded basis, and they're almost fully funded on a market basis. So the churches that come into the Global Methodist Church theoretically have some liability for legacy pension payments, those earned before the separation. But based upon my meetings with Westpath, the likelihood of any church ever having to pay money for that is very slim, if not non-existent. We will have pension plans. That's why I was in Chicago to set up pension plans for the new denomination. The pension plans that we have in the new denomination will be virtually identical to the pension plans that will be available in the United Methodist Church. So it shouldn't make a difference. That consideration shouldn't make a difference. So now there was someone over here.
My question was about pensions.
Oh, good. Okay. Okay, let me call on my friend Leroy here real quick.
Keith, I'm a general evangelist in the United Methodist Church. What are they going to, we're endangered species in the United Methodist. What are we going to be in the global?
Well, you won't be an endangered species, that's for sure. In fact, I'm working with folks right now with the Association of General Evangelists to address the provisions that will be in our discipline to both continue and elevate the office of General Evangelist in the new church. So let me come back here, and then I'll come up here.
Mine deal with pensions also. Just help me clarify. I know the pensions that I've put in so far, they're mine, and with the church business for me. Will that transfer, the whole kit and caboodle transfer, or will it have to be a process to transfer it?
If you align, if you transfer your clergy credentials into the Global Methodist Church, what Westpath will do will identify what the liability is for your benefits. They will assign an equal number of assets, a minimum of an equal number of assets, to cover your liability, and it will transfer into what's called a spin-off or spun-off pension plan, a legacy plan that will be for persons who were ministers in the United Methodist Church before they aligned with the Global Methodist Church, and it will just be for them. Okay? Does that make sense?
So the thing about pensions is, the bigger you grow it, the more it grows.
The
If I'm gonna take a big chunk and put it over here, then we're gonna just sit it right there, and then you're gonna start a new account, I'm starting at zero again.
Okay, no, the amount that you took and put over here continues to earn income, investment income and all of that.
Money I'm putting into it from that point forward.
You won't be putting any money into the legacy plan anymore. Yeah, well, and that's true. That'll be true for everybody across the board. The existing pension plans of the United Methodist Church will be terminated essentially. There'll be no more new persons added to them, and there'll be no more new benefits earned under them. But you will continue to earn income on that. Now, you have a defined benefit. Like I said, this really starts getting technical. There is a defined benefit portion, and that portion, we will know what the liability for that is, but your benefit will continue to increase some under the defined benefit, but we will have Westpath will have ascertained what that ultimate exposure is actuarially, and sufficient assets will be assigned. So you should not be disadvantaged. Now, if you leave the United Methodist Church before all of this happens, the legislation currently says your pension benefit is defined by its account balance at that time, and you do lose money there. So don't leave the United Methodist Church before we get through this. Yeah. Okay, let me come over here. Can I take Carlos, and then I'll take you, and then I'll come to you.
How do you decide the decision is up to 50% or 2/3?
That's up to the leadership board of the church. So your church leadership board will say, well, what is in the best interest of our church here? Some churches would say, we shouldn't make a major change like this unless 2/3 of our congregation supports it, or more. Like if you were going to build a new building. Most of you know, if you build a new building, the leadership says, hey, we don't want to start this building project with 51%. We want to know that we got 90% in support of this. So some churches will decide we want the higher level because that will determine we're more unified. But if you say 2/3 and the vote ends up being 60% want to go this way and 40% want to go that way, then the 60% will be upset that they can't go the way they want to do because of the 40%, and it creates the potential for division. So if you do a simple majority, then you know that the majority of the congregation wants that, and no one's being held hostage by a minority at that point. So those are some of the considerations. But it'll be up to the leadership board of that local church. Yes, sir.
Of the 13 seminaries in the, I guess, the Western or United States, United Methodist Church, how many will be going over? I've heard that the progressive movement in the seminary is one of the big reasons for the breakup of the church, because they've been indoctrinating people to a different thinking other than what's said in the Bible, so they become more liberal stuff. So how many churches will be going to the global United?
How many seminaries? We will not have any denominational seminaries, but United Theological Seminary, which is a Methodist seminary, United Methodist Seminary, is significantly committed to the Global Methodist Church. They'll probably remain independent. I mean, like I said, we will not have Global Methodist Church seminaries, but we will be investing in a number of seminaries like United, like Asbury, You know, like, say, Wesleyan Seminary at Indiana Wesleyan University, that's different than Wesley Seminary. Hmm?
Concerned with their doctrines and teachings.
Yeah, we will.
Divert from the Bible.
No, that's part of the approving them as educational institutions, that they teach sound doctrine. And see, I said I'd come to you. I'm going to go over here after him, and then I'll come back to you.
I'm not a pastor, but I do have.
Praise God.
Anyway, say I am a pastor.
Okay.
And I got 4 more years in ministry.
Yes.
Maybe not the next number of years. So we split,
Yes.
and I come over. So if I stayed in the United Methodist, my retirement plan would be X number of dollars.
Right.
If I'm over here in the Global United Methodist Church, will my same benefits, salary, or whatever you want, be the same?
It should be. And here's why. Because the United Methodist Church is moving to a defined contribution plan, which will cover those 4 years. And the Global Methodist Church will have a virtually identical defined contribution plan. So you would have the money, you don't lose anything. You won't be penalized. Right, right. So let me come over here. I think Tom.
My understanding is if the General Conference approves the protocol, then they're going to adjourn the General Conference and split into each group will have their own first General Conference. And I wonder if you would talk something about that, like
Sure.
how many delegates do you expect to show up for the traditional church?
Right.
How many of those belong to the WCA? Who can submit petitions
Right.
to it?
So let me stop you, because what you laid out is not what's going to happen. Okay? But it's okay. Let me tell you why. When the protocol agreement was signed, that was anticipated, that we might have a general conference at which the vote would be on the protocol, and then there would be, the groups would go to separate places and would immediately meet. Everybody understands why that won't work now. Because we don't know when that's going to occur, and the folks that were elected to be delegates to the General Conference of the United Methodist Church may not be able to speak for the groups that emerge from it, okay? And so that's why we have this process of a transitional period and a convening General Conference that will likely occur 12 to 18 months afterwards. And here's why. Because we want churches and annual conferences, especially outside the United States, to be able to make their decision on alignment so that they can send delegates to the convening General Conference, and the people who are going to be part of the new church will make the final decisions for the new church. And people will be able to submit petitions to that convening General Conference.
Okay, if the General Conference occurs next August, September,
The United Methodist General Conference. Right.
when is the earliest there can be a global Methodist church?
Well, based upon, obviously we could call it within a month or two, but that's not likely. What we have said is the earliest would probably be August, September 2023. And between August and September 2022, in that period, we would operate under the transitional Book of Doctrines and Discipline, and then the delegates to that convening General Conference would determine the doctrines and discipline going forward.
So at the General Conference, if it occurs next fall or whenever, if they pass the protocol and then adjourn, it's just going to be a 1 or 2 day conference?
Well, most likely, that's what it would be.
Everybody goes back to Africa or wherever?
Yeah.
They're not going to meet?
No, because we don't know. We won't know, for example, let's say there's 40 delegates from Liberia. We don't know at that point which way Liberia will vote to go. They have to have their vote. So we can't say, you 40 delegates from Liberia, come on and be part of this decision. At this point, right. From the convening general conference, not from the launch of the church and its beginning of operations. So let me come over here. You sir.
Yeah, I guess this is gonna sound more like a legal question, so I'm gonna call it. When the protocol was first kind of bumped down the road, it was because the COVID had broke out, and they couldn't get delegates in from, say, Africa or Europe or wherever. And so it was bumped down again, and now we're down in now 2022.
Right.
Now, isn't there something that, here again, I don't know, I'm just asking you, isn't there something that after this has moved so many times, and for whatever reason, whether it's the COVID or an outbreak or some variant will cause it, if you have a quorum where you have enough people, whether they come from Africa, or whether they come from Europe, or wherever they come from, if you have a quorum, can't you vote that protocol regardless without the United Methodist Church leadership moving it back down again?
The problem would be that the Commission on General Conference sets the dates for the convening. So a group of people can't just show up and say, we're the General Conference of the United Methodist Church. It's unlikely that you would have that kind of gathering where you'd have a quorum of all delegates absent the Commission on General Conference bringing it about.
All right, and a follow-up to that question is, do they have to meet in person? I mean,
No, and that's,
you can, you can do.
yeah, that's why I said the different ways in which it could occur. It could be in person, it could be distributed, it could be hybrid, it could be virtual. Now, those who are delaying, engaged in delaying, their argument is that a decision of this magnitude about separating the church ought to be made with people in the same room looking at each other making the decision. I think that's awful. What is the word I want to use? Emotional, sympathetic, whatever. Anyway, I mean, I think we all know, or many of us know, that the separation needs to occur, and we don't need to look at each other to cast the vote. Okay, so yes, ma'am.
Talk about pensions, but what about health care?
Yeah, okay. So another thing that was involved in the conversations that I had at Westpath last week was setting up a health insurance plan for the Global Methodist Church. And so I can't tell you it will be identical to, say, what the Virginia Conference offers, but we will have a denominationally wide health plan that will, the premiums of which we would expect would be handled by local churches, just as the United Methodist Church does. Yes, sir. I see you guys over here. Yes, sir.
It seems like with the split up, that each church should be checked to see what its position is with, majority of the members, 2/3, or whatever the vote is, majority vote, to check that and find out which positions each church within that group is going to take, so you can separate.
Right.
Got a logical form,
So did everyone hear his question? I keep forgetting to repeat the question. He's saying, seems like there ought to be a way that each church could take a vote on this. Right. So,
Bishop saying,
well, the bishop isn't going to,
well, a lot of congregations don't agree with what the conference
Right.
is saying, so that congregation should be.
and they are, under the protocol, your local church could decide it's going to take a vote regardless of what the annual conference does. Okay? And by the time we get there, we will have very detailed instructions on our website available to your churches that will tell you exactly what you must go through.
A lot of people say, though, that the reason people are waiting, each denomination waiting, because it's very expensive to do it that way, to opt out.
To do it without the benefit of the protocol, but with the protocol, there is no expense for you to separate. There would be minimal expense connected with your actions on your deeds and stuff, but you wouldn't have to pay the hundreds of thousands of dollars that many churches are being asked to pay in order to disaffiliate. David, and then okay, go ahead. Go ahead. He wants you to go first. He's deferring.
We've mentioned delegates to the
Yes.
to the General Conference. How are in the Global Methodist Church will the delegates be selected like they do now, where it's
Most likely it will be very similar because the annual conference will be composed of churches and clergy who are committed to the theological positions. So we will allow them, delegates will be apportioned out to the various annual conferences, and each annual conference will elect the delegates from their annual conference. Yeah. David, did you have a question?
I've got
Okay.
3 questions.
Well,
And I'll make
should we let him do 1, 2, or 3? Go ahead. We'll see.
Has any thought been given to bishops serving churches? For example,
right.
Bishop Pereira down in Cuba, in the Cuban Methodist Church,
Right.
he
Right.
also is the senior pastor.
Yeah, we've discussed that with presiding elders, but not with bishops. Again, the reason is we want the bishops to be involved and accessible to all the churches in their annual conference. We want the number of churches to be of a size that makes that possible. So no, we haven't discussed that possibility. Yeah.
The other question I wanted to ask, for United Methodist pastors who have already surrendered their ordination
Right.
out of the issue of leading or conscience,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of restoration,
The process will essentially be the same as those transferring over. We will recognize the credentials that you surrendered and receive you without necessity of going through any other hoops other than the ones that will make people transferring laterally. In other words, making sure your background check is current, that there are no issues out there with respect to your performance, and that you affirm the theological commitments of the Global Methodist Church.
last question. A moment ago you said for those who leave the United Methodist Church before the protocol goes down, the impact on their pension, could you just
Sure.
clarify?
And this varies, but right now, the provision is that if you leave the United Methodist Church, the amount of money that you have then in the pension plan, even if it's defined benefit, is reduced to its account balance, which means essentially the future contributions to that would end. Okay, you'd still get earnings on it, but future contributions end. So essentially, it converts the defined benefit portion of your pension and treats it as if it were a defined contribution. I can help you dig further into that individually later. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
With the unfortunate actions that have taken place in Georgia and in California and
New Jersey.
Northeast with the Korean pastors, in your opinion, is there some subterfuge taking place behind the scenes to enable the rejection of the protocol?
No. Okay, so the question was, with the recent events and 3 annual conferences, is there some subterfuge going on to prevent the passage of the protocol? No, I do not believe that is the case. Earlier I talked about the 3 kind of categories in the Council of Bishops. The 3 bishops involved there would be among the group that I would characterize as more institutionalist. Each of those cases are somewhat unique. They're not identical. And they've been resolved in different ways. In California, the bishop backed off and reappointed 2 of the 3 Korean pastors to their then existing appointments. The third one was reassigned, but the situation there was his laity were divided, and so that didn't help getting him reappointed. In New Jersey, the pastor decided to surrender his credentials. About half of the congregation left the United Methodist Church and went down the road and started a new congregation, which is the New Jersey Gospel Mission Church, GMC, Global Methodist Church. So they've already declared that's where they're going to end up. I mean, this is from them. And they called their pastor who had surrendered his credentials to continue. It's very sad because the remaining congregation is a member of the WCA as well. And so we did not want to see that division, but I understand, and I'm fully supportive of both of those congregations. In Georgia, North Georgia is the strangest part. Did I do something to I've got my hand in the pocket here, did I? Oh, the battery's going off. It's yellow. Which means I need to shut up, okay? But I'll keep talking for a moment. In North Georgia, it's a very strange situation. And you all are probably aware that the annual conference and the local church have now agreed to participate in a mediation. So the word out there was the annual conference had seized the property of the church. No, Mount Bethel Church is still meeting in its building. Its leadership still has it. So the annual conference would like to seize the property, but they've not been able to. And I would say since April the 5th, I have devoted close to 50% of my time to working with Mount Bethel in these other two situations. So that's the commitment of the WCA to be involved. I think what has happened is these three situations have strengthened the movement toward adoption of the protocol because people see on every side how ugly this could get. And by the way, if you are, I doubt many people here are thinking about aligning with the post-separation UMC, but if you are, there are statements that, traditionalist, you will be respected and able to do what you want to do in the post-separation UMC is undercut by the actions of these bishops. Because if they can do this now, they're going to have even greater freedom in the future. Well, I'm going to wrap up because my red light just came in the room. And I know that others will be coming in. Again, please pick up cards if you'd like them, and be in touch with me if you have questions. I want to tell you, I so appreciate prayers that are offered up on my behalf. I cannot tell you the difference that makes. And I get text. I mean, I got 2 this morning driving here from people that I don't even know who said, look, God has laid you on my heart today, and I want you to know that I'm praying for you. And I can't tell you the difference that makes, because you're right. This is a struggle. This is a battle, and it's a spiritual battle. And I cannot do this in my own strength, and I deserve none of the credit for what's happening. This is God's battle. I am God's person in this, and I try to live a surrendered life every day dependent on the Holy Spirit. And your prayers are absolutely essential in that. So thank you for praying.
Preach it, brother, preach it.